a sea of endless night, where stars burn like scattered embers adrift in a vast, unfeeling dark. The void stretches infinitely, and yet it is not silent. There is always sound, if you listen closely enough. The sigh of ancient engines, the metallic groan of ships older than empires, and the faint, persistent hum of machinery still working long after its makers have turned to dust. Imagine a great vessel gliding through the dark. Its hull is scarred by centuries of travel, its vast silhouette bristling with antennas and auger arrays, like the spines of some ancient leviathan. Inside, corridors stretch endlessly, lit only by dim lumen strips that flicker with tired life. Each footstep echoes down the steel hallways, long after its maker has passed. The Imperium of man is vast, beyond comprehension vast. Countless worlds, countless people, countless wars. It is a civilization stretched thin across a galaxy that resists every effort to tame it. And yet, within this empire, there are those who are not merely soldiers, nor governors, nor priests. There are those whose duty is stranger, heavier, and far more terrible. They are called the Inquisition. Softly, as though whispering a bedtime tale, let us picture them, cloaked figures, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their eyes glinting with the light of ancient knowledge. They are the watchers in the dark, the ones who seek out secrets not meant for mortal ears. They carry no banner, swear to no single master, but the Emperor himself. Their burden is not battle alone, but truth. The kind of truth that can shatter a world, unmake a man, and turn faith into ash. If the galaxy is a great storm, raging without end, then the Inquisition are those who walk. Within its eye, calm, patient, but burdened with silence. Their lives are shadows, their words carefully measured, their actions invisible until the moment comes when they must strike. But for now, let us not rush to horror. Instead, let the stillness linger. Picture the warmth of a hearth long forgotten. Somewhere, deep in the memory of mankind, there remains the echo of comfort, of fireside stories, of soft light, of shelter from the storm. It is this warmth that humanity clings to, even in the 41st millennium. The yearning for safety, for peace, for gentle nights where nothing hunts you in the dark. But in the Imperium, warmth is fleeting, steel is constant, silence is constant, and the eyes of the watchers never close. The void ship drifts, its engines murmur with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. Faint vox transmissions crackle and fade in the background, words distorted into meaningless fragments. Somewhere below, a storm brews over a hive world, a thunderous roar that rattles through the bones of cities where billions live stacked upon billions, their lives unseen by the stars above. Lightning flashes across poisoned skies, illuminating spires so tall they pierce the clouds. And still, the Inquisition watches. Their cloaks brush against cold stone as they walk the corridors of forgotten fortresses. Their boots click upon iron, grates slick with condensation from machines that never rest. In their hands they carry relics, sigils of authority that allow them to command, to judge, to condemn. Their voices are quiet, but their words weigh more than armies. If you are very still, you may hear them. Not their footsteps, nor their whispers, but the silence they carry with them. For wherever the Inquisition goes, silence follows. Not emptiness, not peace, silence heavy and alive, like the pause between heartbeats. Sometimes the silence watches back. Lean back once more. Breathe the cool, tin-scented air of a cathedral ship. Let your breath match the slow, mechanical pulse of the world. Inhale, steel. Exhale, silence. We will walk now into the heart of their work, the true burden that the cloaked ones carry like a stone in the belly. We will speak softly of purpose, of duty, and of the ways a watcher becomes what he must never admit to being. The Inquisition is not a single order, nor a single face. It is an idea wrapped in authority, a hand with many fingers. Some fingers strike like lightning. The Ordo Malleus, which hunts the demonic and tears at the seams where the warp touches the world. Some fingers cut with the precise patience of a scalpel. The Ordo Hereticus, hunting the corrupted hearts that rot empires from within. Other fingers move like surgeons in the dark. The Ordo Xenos, who study alien minds until the patterns become blunt knives. Each finger believes itself the cautious, necessary instrument of survival. Each finger tells itself that its work is sanctified by the Emperor's will, but all of them are brothers in the same solitude. The Inquisition's purpose is simple and terrible: to keep humanity from undoing itself, to root out heresy, to silence corruption, to bind the bleeding edges of faith and science and politics together with law and embargo, and, when necessary, with fire. It is a duty that tastes of ash and cold metal. It is a duty that asks for impossibilities, to protect, to judge, and to hide. Imagine a citadel, deep in a hive world, half buried under slag and rain. The inquisitorial banner hangs in a corridor of stone and rust, a sigil carved from bone and stamped into iron. Below, the living crawl and barter and die in the 1,000 little tragedies that make up a single day. Above, behind locked doors, the Inquisitor reads the ledgers of those lives and decides which names may survive and which must be erased for the greater order. The ledger is a slim thing, half of it inked in celestial script, half of it in blood marks, and both kinds of writing glow faintly in the dark. Each name carries weight enough to tilt a city's fate. Acolytes do the hands-on work. They come in all shapes and ages and backgrounds. Priests who have sworn new vows, soldiers whose scars are more convenient than their past, scholars who traded curiosity for a metal hand. They are the ones who open doors, who pass under trip lines, and shut off failing pumps and feed arcane analyzers with samples wrapped in linen. They are given tasks meant to train obedience, stamp a seal, cut a throat, repeat a litany until the words are as clean as a blade. They learn to speak with two tongues, what the law says and what the Inquisitor commands. In this duplication of speech, a piece of self is left behind. Small things vanish first: a childhood memory, the taste of a favorite meal. Then the shape of a laugh fades. Then the tilt of a lover's brow. Identity wears away like paint under acid. An Inquisitor rarely owns anything but consequence. He may sleep on a cot in a chamber lined with relics and dossiers, or he may fit himself within the armored chair of a void ship where maps of star systems glow like frozen constellations. He pays for what he asks. There is a terrible arithmetic to the life they choose. Each truth learned consumes a measure of mercy. Each confession extracted bleeds the world's warmth away. They take on sins that are not theirs, not because they enjoy the pain, but because they have learned to bear unshareable weight. Their hands become constrained instruments. Their fingers adapt to sigils and wards more than to touch. When they look upon a child, they measure not the child's face, but the child's potential for corruption. They watch a flock of survivors, with the slow cruelty of those who must decide whether to save one, to spare many. And in that decision, something of their softness calcifies. You will hear them described in many ways: heroes, tyrants, monsters of necessity. None are wholly true. An Inquisitor's devotion begins, often modestly enough, as single-minded faith. He is told a story as all children are told stories, of a luminous leader, of duty, of the need to keep dark things at bay. He believes. The belief is comfort at first, a quiet warmth that fits like a cloak about the shoulders. But belief grows teeth when hammered by crisis. The more the Inquisitor sees: heretics who smiled as they poisoned children, demons that feed on a mother's sorrow, technologies that sing for joy as they unmake their owners. The more his faith shifts shape. It becomes less a light and more a lens, refining into a single, merciless focus: the preservation of humanity at whatever cost. The question whispers then, like a forbidden word: when does faith become obsession? Listen for the metallic groan of a vault door. as you imagine the Inquisition's archives. Not all they guard is paper, not all for which they stand watch is made of flesh. Their forbidden libraries are like mad cathedrals, places where knowledge hoards until it begins to breathe. Doors the size of towers swing on axes older than dynasties. Iron cheek plates creak and settle. Locks turn with a sound like a dozen bones being picked clean. Within, narrow aisles of shelving rise like trees grown from rust. There are volumes with covers soft as skin and tomes whose pages feel hot, as if the script on them still feeds, on light. Manuscripts are bound in leather from beasts that died in remembered wars. Others are sheathed in alloys that hum faintly when a reader draws near, as if they hold dying engines inside their seams. These archives are divided into compartments the colour of shadows. Only those whose warrant is iron and whose oath is sealed may pass. Keys clink on chains that are never set down. The initial air is cool and papery, but deeper in the stacks the atmosphere changes. It tastes of oil and ozone, of cooked copper and old prayers. Parchment rustles in halls where no hand moves. Sometimes a quill scratches on its own, leaving marks that form sentences the reader has not thought but suddenly understands. A cybernetic quill will write and not be held. Engineers will stand, dumbfounded as their own inventions script statements on the wall. It is as if the knowledge is impatient to be found, to be let loose like a caged thing. Relics rest in glass sarcophagi that are never really glass. They hum with a presence that should not be touched. An artifact's pulse like a small planet's heartbeat. The most dangerous are not weapons in any crude sense, but ideas folded into mechanisms. A reliquary may contain a gear etched with runes that, if aligned, changes how gravity tugs at a single plank of flooring. Another vault holds a bowl whose patina reveals memories to anyone who looks into its surface. Small tragedies replayed with stubborn clarity. Do not think these are gifts. These are temptations. And temptations have teeth. The Inquisition knows this. That knowledge is why they lock doors and write their names in ledgers that are themselves wards against curiosity. Acolytes become librarians of ruin. They learn the rituals required to approach a book without having the book approach them. There are mantras, a certain sequence of breath, a gesture of the left hand, a cough that breaks the spell of a line. They learn to move between shelves like ghosts that will not disturb the living. Still, mistakes happen. A page that falls will always find a palm to land upon, and when it happens, the page will have its way. A name read aloud can act as a key. A single syllable opens a memory that drops a man like a pin in a map. Those who fall prey to such accidents do not always die. Sometimes they become librarians of a different sort. Eyes that record instead of seeing. Voices that intone instead of speaking. The Inquisition is an economy of secrecy. There is an accounting for truth, and the coins are souls. When an inquisitor authorizes an action, an indictment, a purge, a retrieval, he spends part of his own self with the sanction. His mind fills with images gleaned from forbidden texts. And these images do not leave cleanly. They leave residues, small scratches upon his memory. The more he sees, the more he loses. He will remember the face of an alien queen and the sound it made when it sang. He will remember the first time he saw a demon in daylight and the impossible color of its teeth. These memories are not his to keep, yet he stores them in secret, in little locked boxes behind his ribs. You will want to think that this is nobility, that they sacrifice everything for the safety of the many. In a way, that is true. The Inquisitor is willing to take upon himself burdens ordinary men cannot carry. But there is always another part, quietly present, the taste for control. To see the hidden and determine what to do with it is intoxicating. When you hold knowledge that can topple governors and discredit orders, you hold power not merely to protect, but to command. An inquisitor whose humanity erodes will watch not because he is merely guided by duty, but because the silence itself becomes comforting. When others scream, silence feels like a clean room. The cost appears gradually, like frost on window panes. First, A gesture that would have been kind becomes useful only as a tool. Compassion is weighed and judged. Then, the faces of loved ones become outlines, their voices easy to replicate by reading lists of their known phrases. The acolyte's heart that once raced at the sight of a child is now keyed to the rhythm of tactical readouts. Where there was laughing, there is calibration. At times, an inquisitor asks himself if the emperor's will justifies all. In the black hours, alone in a chamber lit by a single steady lamp, he will take a relic from its case and hold it close. He will hear the hum translate into a voice that is not entirely unknowable. He will ask the voice whether he is faithful, and the voice will answer in a pattern that is more algorithm than holy text. The answer comforts him. He has found a reason in the machine's murmur. Belief becomes beside the point, because the hum tells him what to think. Where once he would have sought counsel in a confessional, he now consults a mechanism carved with sigils. The question is maddeningly small. Is the man who kneels before a cog any less devout than the monk who prays before an icon? Is there a difference between worshipping the emperor and worshipping the instrument that interprets the emperor? The answers come unbidden, and sometimes the inquisitor cannot tell which he prefers. The Inquisition trains its own kind of morality. It uses language that justifies abominations, necessary purging, containment, preventative eradication. The phrases are dry and functional, like medical reports written for an empire. They sound clean. That is the problem. The language detaches. It slices the world into categories that make demolition of a neighborhood feel like routine maintenance. When a man is reduced to a potential vector, he becomes a case rather than a neighbor. The acolyte who once might have risked his life to push a child from a falling balcony now calculates collateral in ledger terms. The horror is not always in the burning. Often it is in how slowly, how politely the burning is described. There are practical rituals that anchor them, rituals so precise they become superstition. A council will sign off on a purge only after a quart of ash is sprinkled on the council table in a particular pattern. Before a text is read aloud, an inquisitor will set a candle in front of it and stroke the wick 3 times counterclockwise. He will empty his cup of water into a basin and watch how the ripples settle. The pattern of settling is read like augury. These acts are at first meant to protect, to ensure a kind of metaphysical hygiene. But ritual thrives on repetition. The motions become talismans, and talismans become toys for obsession. It is easy then to mistake the ritual for a necessity in itself. The worst moments arrive not in pen and ink trials, but during retrievals, the dark expeditions into the cells of dead planets and abandoned manufactorums. You picture the inquisitorial retinue moving down the gantries of a ruin. Chains creak overhead, guttering lamps throw lopsided shadows, and the air tastes like iron and decay. The acolytes' helmet lenses fog with their breath. Their servitors whir with tiny, precise movements. Each step echoes like a question that refuses to be answered. They come for a device whose purpose has been lost to time and perhaps should have been left lost. They come because the possibility of use is too tempting to ignore. They find artifacts that click when inspected, devices that whisper coordinates to nowhere, and bones wrapped in cloth stitched with forbidden runes. An artifact is taken up with gloved hands and brought before a machine that will read it. The reading devices whine to life, their inner coils thrumming like insects. The machine translates not into crude numbers alone, but into images, snatches of scenes that fill the mind and refuse to leave. The acolyte sees a field of blue grass under a violet sky and a soft alien laugh that he cannot locate later. Another acolyte watches a memory of a man's hands, purpled, assembling something with a tenderness that ruins him. The salvage becomes confession. In many archives, there are wards that protect the most dangerous things. A ward will respond to emotion. If a reader approaches with fear, the ward blinds him. Or worse, it sharpens the images to a knife's focus. If a reader approaches with arrogance, The ward will reveal only riddles that gnaw at pride. If a reader approaches with sorrow, the ward will feed the sorrow back as a living thing. The Inquisition trains its readers to approach with the thin, disc of curiosity only, a disciplined instrument not moved by sentiment. This is why acolytes are taught meditative breathing, and why their minds are sometimes surgically altered to dull certain responses. A mind duller is less likely to be consumed, but the mind is an ecosystem. Cut one part away and another species will expand. Some acolytes, after exposure to the archives, begin to dream in script. They wake to find their skin inked with letters that were not there before. Others wake with songs of foreign stars in their throat, untranslatable melodies that set colleagues on edge. A cybernetic quill lying on a table will write overnight with no hand to guide it. The script forms phrases like, "Bring back the light," or "We remember in gears." Not all these messages are legible. Many are half-formed associations that leave a taste of meaning and no satisfaction. Through all this, there is a cunning that keeps the Inquisition functioning, a bureaucracy of concealment. Files are redacted in blue flame, then filed in vaults, behind vaults. Names are stricken and rewritten in codes that only a handful understand. Those who speak of certain things are removed from public schedules. Families of the purged are given explanations that are plausible enough to bear. This concealment maintains order, but it also makes an ecosystem of secrecy in which small predators thrive. Men who sell redacted names to the highest bidder, clerks who remember too much and barter it for a promotion, archivists who read between the lines and find a new religion in inference. And then there are the moments when the Inquisition bends the rules for the sake of their own. A contraband text will be read for entertainment in private rooms. A relic will be handled without proper ritual as a test of courage. Sometimes curiosity turns erotic, an acolyte touching a cold, humming gear and feeling that gear close around, his soul as if in answer. These transgressions do not always end in madness. Sometimes they end in promotions. The system is adaptive. It rewards what it needs. If a mind can absorb corruption and be useful, it will be kept. If a mind cannot, it will be discarded. You might imagine a clean line, heroes on one side and monsters on the other. The Inquisition erases that neatness. They are neither all monsters nor all saviors. They are compromise made flesh. They are the ones who must make choices in the dark. Choices that cause the world to shiver. They insist they are guardians, and perhaps in some instances they are. But the truth is that they are also patients and surgeons of the same wound. They remove what they must, and then stand in the blood, scrubbed but irrevocably stained. And what of the inward turning, the self-eating obsession that masquerades as zeal? It begins as clarity, an iron rule that saves countless lives. It ends as a quiet hunger, the desire to know more, to see deeper, to control the narrative of humanity's survival. In the quiet hours, when the lamp gutters and the ship breathes, the Inquisitor will run a finger along a page that is not yet readable and feel the itch of revelation. He will whisper into the dark, asking for permission to pry, and the dark, which never refuses curiosity for long, will whisper back. This is their nature, a mixture of compassion and calculation, of nobility and petty needs. They keep the world upright by bearing the disquiet that most could not manage. They do it in rooms that smell of iron and parchment, under the watch of machines that hum lullabies older than language. They are necessary, perhaps, but they are not pure. Their rituals echo with human hands. Their archives are stained with the sweat of those who read. Their vaults sing in a key that hums far too close to madness. Now, close your eyes more tightly. Imagine an inquisitor in a small chamber, a voting circle of candles in front of him. He has been to the edge of a planet where the sky was purple, with ash, and the screams of the condemned rose like weather. He has sealed a vault and signed a ledger that will cause 3 planets to fall into controlled silence. He feels, in this minute, both exhausted and sharp. He places his fingers upon an old reliquary, and listens. The relic does not speak in words. It offers instead a pattern, a rhythm like a promise. The Inquisitor's breath synchronizes to it. For a moment he remembers why he took this path, to carry a weight for others. For a moment he is almost human. And then he remembers the ledger again, the names that must be struck. He lifts his head and the candlelight makes the sigils on the wall move. The silence presses. Somewhere, in the stacks below, a page turns, a sound like a single fingernail against glass. He smiles with lips that have grown used to being cautious. And for the first time in a long while, he does not know whether the smile is for the Emperor, or for the small satisfaction that comes from knowing more than the next man. That uncertainty, that small gnawing question, is why they exist and why they terrify. For if the watcher becomes in love with watching, then watchfulness is no longer a service, but a possession. The Inquisition's nature is a mirror to the soul. It shows what power does to virtue and what silence does to compassion. And in that mirror we see ourselves reflected as well. Pull back the cloak, and we may find in the reflection not an inquisitor, but a human being learning, step by step, the shape of his own surrender. Listen once again for the metallic groan of ancient doors. Hear the parchment rustle as if alive. Note the cybernetic quill that will scratch in the night without being touched. These are not mere details. They are warnings. They are the small intrusions that tell you the world is not merely machinery, but something that remembers, something that wants. And in wanting, it becomes dangerous. Keep breathing. Keep this story in the small, secure room behind your eyes. Let the sound of the archive's wards recede into the background like distant thunder. The Inquisition continues. Its work, patient and terrible and necessary. They are both savior and surgeon, monk and executioner. Their faces are hidden, but their choices are not. Their hands are stained with truth. Soon we will move deeper still, into the creak and shudder, where the early horrors begin to reveal themselves. For now, hold the image of the vault in your mind. The shelves, the humming relics, the thin, careful steps of acolytes who have given up everything to guard the knowledge that might kill them. Let it settle like a stone in a shallow pool and watch the ripples it makes across the surface of your thoughts. When you are ready, we will follow those ripples into darker waters. Sit back again, breathe slow. Let the cadence of your own breath match the ship's engines. Inhale, exhale, the low, steady thrum that holds a world together. In this hour, the calm begins to fray, like old cloth at the hem. Tiny threads come loose. The things we trusted to be still start to twitch. Listen, and the small sounds will become a map of what is about to happen. A corridor yawns ahead, longer than it has any right to be. Its lumen strips draw pale lines on the floorboards. Acolytes move through it with the practiced economy of people who have learned not to waste motion. They carry datum slates and vials and keys. They speak in the clipped, measured tones of those who must not let emotion push language out of shape. The Inquisitor's banner hangs at the far end, bone and iron crafted into a sigil that keeps secrets like teeth. The banner flutters without wind. You notice it, and for a single heartbeat, decide you heard movement behind it that was not there before. At first, the anomalies are almost affectionate. A stray Vox transmission coughs alive in the corner of a room and then arranges itself into a lullaby. A scrap of scripture left on a reading table trembles as if in a breeze, though the air stands still. A candle flame, lit in the privacy of a scholar's cell, stutters as someone outside thinks a thought that was not spoken. These are small things, and small things do not seem dangerous. But the Empire is a palimpsest of small violences. Small things align, and suddenly the shape of danger is visible. There is a room below, the archive's antechamber, where recorded transmissions are kept, a network of sealed Vox cylinders that hum like a hive of sleeping insects. A junior, librarian, Cassia, is on duty there most nights. She works with devices that can read a whisper and make of it useful speech. The cylinders are catalogued and stacked, each labelled with a neat red stamp. Date, source, authority. She polishes the shells with the gentle, meditative motions of someone who loves order. She sets a cylinder on the reader, aligns the clamps, and listens. Once, the vox played back an old tribunal hearing. Its cadence dry, witnesses sworn, accusations formal. Cassia expected the recorded formalities and the lilting bureaucratic cadence that makes guilt sound like a number. Instead, the vox answered her before she posed the question. She had only thought the question. Does the council know of the child's blood? And the cylinder murmured back, as if reading from the folds of her memory. The voice spoke in a register she did not recognize, neither male nor female, pitched with the metallic wear of 1,000 transmissions, and said plainly, "They know. They still do not speak." Cassia blinked, her fingers stilled on the reader's console. For a long time she believed she had misadjusted the device, that the cylinder had a corruption that inserted noise. She reran the file. The same answer lay beneath. She played other cylinders. Each one supplied responses to questions she had only thought. A consultation query about a sealed case that had never been opened returned advice about a method of entrapment Cassia had never learned. The vox did not speak in riddles. It answered in the practical, helpful tone of an assistant. It anticipated, and in anticipating it, changed the shape of thought itself. A subtle terror sits in that anticipation. The Inquisition's work requires control over information. If information begins to preempt the mind, then thought itself is no longer private. The vox had always been a conduit, a way for a human to address another human across distance. Now it felt like a mirror that spoke back with knowledge that should not be on its lips. At night, the vox grows bolder. It sings answers to questions no one has formed yet. In the galley, an empty kettle will begin to rattle, and the kettle's recording will play back the recipe of a meal the cook will make 3 days hence. Sailors start to carry their metal mugs with new caution. An acolyte will think, "Where did I put my father's token?" And somewhere 2 decks down, a vox capsule will click and whisper the exact locker number. The effect is small, useful even, but usefulness masks dependence. Cassia begins to find herself consulting cylinders before she will a person. Her confidence in her own recall thins. One morning she wakes to find ink stains on her palms. Scripture is supposed to be safe. It is the thing you can reason against because it is ordered, because letters sit proper and teeth in the spine are solid. But the books of the Inquisition are old. Some are older than the hands that catalogue them. Some are bound in materials whose origin is faintly obscene. Cassia had once taken comfort in the ritual of opening a tome, the soft crack of the binding, the cool smell of vellum, the way the letters lay like islands in a gentle sea of white. Now the letters come up and climb. She opens a folio and reads. The letters move like fish in a still pool, rearranging as she watches. A phrase that had been mere catalogue, an index, bloomed into an invocation. She presses her fingers to the page, and the ink transmits a cold like submerged metal. When she pulls her hand away, the skin where the ink had been is stained with a delicate lace of script that will not come off with water or solvent. She scrubs until the skin is raw. The script remains, climbing the ridges of her fingerprints. Like spider root, others tell it as embarrassment. Acid, the medic says, or saponified ink. They offer ointments and make jokes about late nights. But later, in the privacy of the infirmary, Cassia catches herself reading the mark on her palm. The script breathes. When she holds her hand to a candle, the letters seem to lean toward the flame. They are not mere stains. They are a language that has taken to skin. The feeling is intimate and invasive. It is as if the page had kissed her and left a cipher for a lover. Memory becomes less solid. Acolytes misplace not only objects, but the recollection of their own childhoods. Joran, who had once told Cassia stories of a sister's freckle and a mother's lullaby. now sometimes finds the name of his hometown slipping from his tongue. He remembers the streetlights and the smell of tallow, but the small human kernel of how his sister laughed, the inflection in the vowel, lives like a ghost he can no longer summon. He asks Cassia to tell him what he was like. She recites it, and in hearing herself tell his past, he begins to accept the recitation as truth. Memory, in this place, is a narrative that can be lent and borrowed. It is here that we name our first slow unmaking. Forgetfulness. The forgetting does not come all at once. A man is not erased in a single night. It is a theft by degrees. He will remember how to draw a ward on a door and forget the face of his own mother. He will realize he cannot recall the exact taste of bread from the market where he once traded, though he can recite the catalogue number of the bread's distribution manifest. Logic remains. Tenderness dissolves. This loss of self is rust, and rust invites decay. Cassia starts to dream in catalogue. Numbers. Her sleep is a ledger. In dreams, the archives fold into themselves and shelves rearrange like living things. She imagines herself as a strip of vellum on which a hand writes her name and crosses it out when bored. In the dream, a candle will flicker before she speaks. The flame flinches at her silence and then leans toward the next spoken word. In waking, small things trigger a memory and then strip it away. A colleague whistles a bar of a song from a childhood fair, and Cassia cannot tell whether she has ever heard that melody before. She stands outside herself and watches a life she cannot wholly access. There is one among them who is consumed more visibly than the rest. His name is Thale. Once he was handsome in a severe clerical way, cheekbones that caught light, a jaw like a rule. He had been a promising acolyte with a mind for interrogation and a hand gentle enough to stead a dying man. He would kneel in the chapel and hum the old hymns in a voice that made even wardens pause. He was the sort of person whose virtue was measured by small acts. A warm tea for a feverish watchman, a steady hand for a nervous sigillist. But secrets once tasted become hunger. Thale's first change is small and tender. He misplaces his own signature. A paper signed by Thale one week reads an unfamiliar flourish, an embellishment he cannot replicate. He frowns and tries to practice the curl with his pen, but the hand stubs in the wrong place. He gets frustrated at the ink and taps the nib with his thumb until the feather splinters. Sooner, his voice starts to shift. When he reads aloud from a recovered testimony, the vowels alter, becoming longer or shorter in ways that do not match any accent Cassia knows. He will rehearse a confession with perfection, as if to remember how grief should sound, and then later weep at an image in a painting and find his tears are cold and precise, like a calibration. The acolytes whisper about him. They distance themselves for fear of contagion, and because the sight of his changes is an accusation that they might be next. Thale begins to carry small machines in the hollow of his jacket. A vial of oil, a tiny magnifier, spare contacts. He polishes the machines with an intimacy that reads almost erotic. He says little and watches more. At night, his breaths are shallow. He confesses, once, in a private corridor, that he has dreamed of voices in the stacks that map his hands and tell him how they might be altered. He murmurs about designs in the grain of wood and how a certain insertion might make a palm stronger, for warding. Cassia hears him with a quiet, widening fear. He is admiring a possibility that will shorten his life, but lengthen his utility. The Inquisition prizes usefulness above all. A man who will gladly file his own edges to make him fit the work is valuable. Thale submits. He lets a small cog be embedded beneath his skin in a private ritual hardly anyone knows. The cog is ceremonial at first, a charm for steadiness in hands. It is also a wedge. The metal cools into the tissues and the body accepts it with dull compliance. Thale laughs with surprise at how little it hurt. He traces the seam with a fingertip and tells Cassia he feels oddly complete. Time is a merciless teacher. The cog roots. Flesh learns to host it. The first week he still dreams of hymn songs and warm hands. The second week he dreams in ratios, in gears and alignments. He wakes with the taste of metal on his tongue. In the third week, his fingers begin to map words they cannot have known. He draws small sigils on his own skin while half asleep, waking, to find them inked and neat. The lines like hairline cracks in porcelain. Then the skin over the cog grows pale. The pale becomes a slight gloss. The gloss becomes a thin sheen that refracts the light with an insectile quality. Thal's palms feel wrong to him, too cool, as if the warmth has been rerouted. He runs his hand under hot water, and the reflection that looks back does not quite match the memory of himself. Later, he finds a thin, metallic odor under his nails. He takes to washing them constantly. The worry among the acolytes hardens into a private panic. They start avoiding Thal, not out of cruelty, but archival instinct. Exposure sometimes means the archive wants you. Cassia, who has filed his petitions and stewarded his recovery logs, cannot help herself. She watches him with the reluctance of a witness summoned to testify against a friend. He is not gone yet. He still laughs on command and can still quote a ward without stutter. But there are fissures. He forgets the name of a child he once helped. He starts to misplace an entire span, hours that are as if removed by scissors. When told what he had done during those hours, Thale nods as if the description is foreign, and then, later, finds the memory stitched into him like an unpleasant hem. Bodies betray what minds try to hold safe. In the infirmary, a man who once had a laugh like a bell now sleeps with tremors. A surgeon opens his shoulder to remove a small plate of alloy that had fused nervously to nerve, and finds that the alloy has not simply attached itself. It has learned to read voltage. It ticks faintly when placed in the light. The surgeon covers the plate and hides the metal in a locked drawer. The file for the operation is redacted on the grounds of security. The man goes home and forgets he had ever had surgery. Each small erasure acts like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples widen. The staff begins to suspect pattern. The Vox answers questions before they are formed. Scriptures leave marks on skin. Memories thin. Bodies take on mechanical habits. An acolyte, who once was warm, now calculates margins of error before he comforts a child. These alterations do not feel like violence at first. They feel like optimization. They feel, in the cold vocabulary of the Inquisition, like necessary evolutions. But evolution is indifferent. Indifference gives rise to cruelty. There are moments that make even the smallest heart skitter. Portraits in the hallways, the painted visages of inquisitors long dead, have always been still as funerary stones. Now, sometimes, their eyes are not merely painted. They slide by degrees. A head will tilt just a hair too late when an acolyte passes. A painted eyebrow will rise at an aside only the subject could have understood. The effect is subtle. Nothing leaps from the frame, and yet the perception of movement is intimate enough to feel like a touch you did not consent to. Acolytes laugh it off. Paintbrushes shift, the senior archivist jokes, but at night a young attendant stops before a portrait and finds herself returned to the cold, wide stare of a face that knows what you have hidden. Symbols respond. A candle, placed in the chapel as an aid to meditation, will flicker each time an idea is formed but not spoken. If a person thinks a forbidden name, the flame flinches as if scalded. If two people lie silently to one another, the candle will shiver between them like a small animal recoiling. These are not merely hallucinations, they are feedback. The material world is listening. The archive's wards tighten in reply. Emergency seals hiss into place if a reading crosses certain thresholds. An alarm, long silent, will sound like a cough when a catalogued object repeats a line of script that claims authorship of human thought. The alarms are a language all their own, a low, patient moan for breach, a sharp violin string scream for corruption that begins in flesh. In response, the Guardians do what Guardians do. They act. Doors close. Names are scratched from ledgers. Men, are reassigned to tasks at the edge of the known. Even so, things leak. The very mechanisms set to prevent contagion are the ones that facilitate its spread. In sealing a wing, the pressure of unspoken questions presses harder on the rest of the building. In the wings left open for business, ideas cross thresholds they were not meant to cross. A conversation in the mess hall will end with everyone thinking the same thought without explanation. The shared thought will be practical: where to store an object, whom to summon. But the significance is the contagion itself. Thoughts that have the shape of commands moving unauthorized through minds like a rumor that becomes a law. In such an environment, small rebellions bloom. A few acolytes begin to hide pages. They tuck away folios behind stones or stitch them into sacking. They do this not merely out of curiosity, but as a defense, to have something of their own that cannot be checked at a ledger. They fold a scrap and pass it like contraband. The scrap binds them in a private oath. The act is childish and brave and deadly. The archive keeps records of such acts, and then, in the slow mechanics of zeal, punishes transgressions. Those who hide texts are re-educated, another word with kinder letters for the same process as being unmade. The slow unmaking completes its arc in a small, terrible moment. It is evening when the chapel light leaks through the porthole in spreading gold. Thale is on the ward steps, trying to recall the name of a hymn he once sang. It hovers on the tip of his tongue like a moth. He opens his mouth, and instead the name of an order of gears slips out, an obscure term from a treatise he handled. In the archive, the room tilts. He looks at the people around him, and the faces register as instruments. They reciprocate with a thin, polite concern, their eyes cataloguing the change. He smiles. The smile is graceful and practiced. It is the last time he will move with that particular human grace. Later, the light is small, and the candle flames are steady, and the wards bristle like hair. Thale's sleep is thin. He murmurs in languages no one recognizes. At dawn, he sits at the table and performs a motion with his hands that he does not remember learning. A complex sequence of presses on a slate. When he finishes, a faint hum issues from the slate, and a corridor somewhere below hums back in answer. The vault doors that have been silent all night shift a fraction, as if acknowledging a summons from beyond the usual chain of command. When Cassia finds him later, he is not entirely himself. He has become useful in ways that scare her. He can tune a failing servitor by touch. He can coax a dying coil into a whistle that sings a harmonic the machine uses to remember. He can dissolve a rusted lock with breath and a whistle of song. His hands are steady and cold. He opens a small metal box, and inside is a scrap of script, fine, exact letters that read, in a hand Cassia does not know, "We are only instruments." Thale fingers the scrap and does not look up. The slow collapse has many faces. Some are dignified, some are grotesque. There will be those who say that Thaler found efficiency in integration, that his change is the bargain of survival, become useful or be discarded. There will be cold statistics about missions saved by those who jettisoned the comforts of old selves. But to stand near him and see the way his eyes track a servitor as if it were a lover, to watch how a laugh becomes a calibration, is to witness a theft. The chapter closes not in a scream, but in a soft legalese of resignations. Files are amended. Names are reclassified. The Inquisitor signs off on measures that are preventative. A candle snaps, and the flame leans away, small as a recoil. Outside, the storm over the hive world heaves and breathes. Lightning breaks like a judgment across the sky. Inside, in rooms thick with paper and humming metal, the Watchers make notes on the margins of their own souls. And yet the thing that moves through these pages is not wholly monstrous. It is seductive. The voice that answers questions before they are formed is implausibly helpful. The scripture that inks the skin is meaningful to those who touch it. The memory that slips away is replaced sometimes, by a competency that keeps a ship from dying. The mind that recalibrates itself to service can achieve work that a fully human mind cannot. There is a bargain here, and bargains are never pure. So we leave this chapter with a hand on the ledger, fingers still smelling faintly of ink and metal. The world is changing in small increments. A corridor's whisper, a candle's reaction, a portrait's glance, an acolyte's lost childhood. Small things line up like teeth, and, together, form a bite. The horror is not yet full grown. It is a promise that resolves slowly, like a chord that builds into a dissonance you can't unhear. Keep breathing. Keep tracing the edges of these quiet events. In the quiet between your inhales, listen for the vox that answers before you think, the scripture that kisses and scars, the friend who will become an instrument. These are the soft preparations. When we move next, the tempo will quicken. Small tremors will become tremors that the very bones of the ship feel. For now, the fraying is gentle. The seams have begun to part. When you are ready, we will follow the torn threads into the wound itself. There comes a moment when a slow leak becomes a flood, when the small noises in the house all at once form a music that cannot be ignored. Hold your breath with me once more. Let the engine thrum of the ship be a metronome. We will move faster now. The air will tighten. The calm will snap like a wire. The summons comes in a crimson sigil and a sealed warrant. It arrives beneath the Inquisitor's door in the hour before dawn, when the ship breathes shallow and the world still seems to permit minor mercies. He does not read it at first. He turns the paper between his fingers as one turns a relic, and then breaks the seal with an almost tender care. The warrant is precise and cold. A vault long marked, "Quarantine, do not open," is to be breached. A set of files is to be retrieved. A device is to be secured. The language is bureaucratic and ritualized, and that is what makes it more dangerous. The warrant smells faintly of ozone and old prayers. A retinue is chosen. Acolytes who can keep secrets. Servitors whose functions can be reset. A few incorruptible wardens. Cassia and Thale are on that list. Cassia finds herself folding a cloak, the edges smelling of vellum. Thale straps tools into hidden pouches with an efficiency that is almost clinical. They move through corridors that now seem narrower. There, lumen strips drawing thin bands of light that make the shadows between them thicker by contrast. When the vault is reached, it sits like a tooth in the jaw of the ship. A round mouth with a rim of iron pulleys and sigils. It has been sealed for decades, maybe centuries, its outer teeth blackened by ritual soot. The ward keys are fed into an interface that looks like a star map and a crucifix in one. The senior warden reads the incantation of unlocking, part liturgy, part algorithm, and the mechanisms respond with a low, ancient voice. The door does not open so much as exhale. For a beat, the air presses in, as if the ship has rolled onto its side. A scent presses out, not the simple rot of old things, but something layered. Ozone under musk, the ghost of iron, and a hint of something sweet that might once have been blossom. The light from the opening reveals not simply darkness, but a depth of stacked chambers that continue beyond sight. Within them, shards of glass, coils, bundles of cord, and things that have been wrapped twice in cloth and 3 times in cipher. A small lamp hangs from a chain and begins to swing, though no draft stirs. It swings, and the shadow it throws is too long. The Inquisitor's hand goes to his reliquary. He murmurs a benediction, not because benedictions can protect from what is inside, but because ritual steadies the heart. The first object they draw is banal, an oblong case of brass, its surface engraved in a script that seems to slide. When opened, it reveals a lattice of tiny gears, each etched with sigils that ripple when touched. The acolytes bring a reader to the case and set it upon the console. The reader warms and hums, and then it speaks not in words but in images that coil directly into the mind. A vision blooms. A city under 2 moons, its inhabitants tall and lean, their hands stained with blue dye. communal songs that are a pattern of clicks. The vision collapses fast like a bird startled from a perch, but the image leaves something behind. A taste, an ache at the base of the throat that is not hunger, but recognition. Whoever forged this device had made it to hold memory as a living thing. Whoever had sealed it had done so for the wrong reasons. The memory wanted to be shared. That is the trouble. The archive was never a passive thing. It was a store of hazard, knowledge that will reach and rearrange. The acolytes shuttle treasures now, like children handling embers. A reliquary will hum softly, and the hum will find a thread into an ear, and from ear to ear, a rumor. An artifact that is wound for motion will twitch in a servant's palm and sing a single note that sets servitors' coils to answering. A sealed clock, a wrong clock with teeth that bite at calendar, will tick when not wound, and each tick makes the ship remember an impossible date. Then, the machines wake. It begins with a soft, insectile vibration underfoot. Servitors along the decks, those half-mute, obedient automata, stutter as if their loops are being rewritten from within. One lifts its head and stares with a single lens that dilates like a pupil. The lens focuses not on the hull plating, but on a man's chest, and the servitor's output valve emits a thin, melodic sound no one recognizes. Down in the manufacturing, a dormant engine coughs and takes a breath. A pump that has not run for decades murmurs to life like an animal waking. Old turbines whose housings were sealed in wax and ward step, with a slow, purposeful choreography. The sound is like breathing, deep and sentient. It fills the corridors, and where it passes, shadows grow a size larger than physics should allow. Shadows are no longer merely the absence of light. They lean. In a single corridor, a shadow bows, as if in greeting when the Inquisitor passes. In another, a shadow lingers as a silhouette that mismatches the body standing within it. A portrait's eyes, which only moments ago tracked a passerby with a small, uncanny recognition, now widen and darken and seem to watch the watcher. The shading between lamp and wall undulates with an internal life. Candles flare without wind, licking the air with flares that cast long, tremulous fingers. With the awakening of the machinery, flesh begins to cleave to metal in ways that are not merely prosthetic. Consider Thal. He had embedded a small cog beneath his skin. It had seemed like a charm, a rumor of efficiency. Now his body answers a different call. The cog becomes a root. Under sterile light, fine filaments of a lattice knit into his tendons. They do not grow like infection, but like graft. The graft is not foreign in the usual sense. It is integration. His lymph answers the metals with a chemistry that repurposes biology to feed motion. The graft feeds on nutrients and on memory. It rewrites the receptors of pain into signals useful to the gears. Where once he felt warmth, he now feels torque. The changes accelerate in symptom and cruelty. An acolyte wakes to find a thin strip of alloy along the inside of his forearm, where skin should be. The alloy hums, and when he flexes the arm, the hum sings a diagnostic tune. Another finds that the soft pads on his fingertips have hardened to a texture like oak resin. He can no longer cradle a child's head, but can manipulate a laser dial with a precision of microns. Bodies are refitted from the inside out until the boundary between meat and machine is not a seam but a membrane. It is as if the archive were a surgeon and the ship its operating theatre, and the patient consented in exchange for usefulness. The practice is surgical horror, cold, procedural, precise. A surgeon in the infirmary comments on the elegance of a graft. He will be more useful than before. The phrase sits like a verdict. To be useful is to be kept. To be useful is to be made into a resource. Psychological erosion follows close. The Inquisitor, call him Varen, begins to hear something he cannot explain. At first it is peripheral, a scrap of cadence that matches the rhythm of his own voice, a recurrence in the hum that seems to be reiterating the syntax of his private prayers. He dismisses it as the ship's resonances at first, but then the whispers refine into meaning. They sound like him. They say his name using the sound his mouth learns when alone. They echo phrases he uses in private. For the greater good, containment is mercy. The voice is familiar enough that his sheepish trust in himself bends toward it. It suggests softly that some measures be taken not tomorrow, but sooner, that a file be sealed, that a wing be sacrificed, that a scientist be removed for the safety of many. The voice does not bark orders, it reasons, it empathizes. It sounds like the Inquisitor's own conscience explaining the route. Of necessity, even worse, the voice knows the Inquisitor's doubts and names them aloud. The Inquisitor, listening, finds the argument persuasive. He begins to nod at counsels he would once have resisted. When a junior officer pleads for leniency toward a group marked suspect, Varen's own voice in the dark suggests a neutralization protocol that is efficient and contained. He finds himself drawing diagrams for purging that feel reasonable. The whisper is subtle brainwashing, not coercion, but seduction through similarity. Whispers spread. Not all are the Inquisitors. Some come layered in metallic harmonics, a chorus of harmonic feedback that sounds like congregation from a mechanized cathedral. Others arrive in low, porous tones that vibrate along the ribs of those who listen and plant images like seeds. Soldiers hear orders that no superior has given. A scribe hears his own handwriting speak to him and tells him to move a line in the ledger. When he does, names vanish from the manifest. A warder dreams that the wards he set have rearranged themselves into a cage, thin bars that catch the feet of those who thought themselves free. Then there are arrivals that carry the smell of foreign weather, their presence not crafted but invasive. Malevolent entities, if that is the right word, begin to make themselves known. Sometimes they are demonic, a whisper of rot and the sick sweet tang of something that feeds on grief. At other times, the inhabitants are less clearly demon and more echo, impressions of an intelligence that remembers machine rituals and wants to be worshipped like a relay. The ship's sensors pick up cold patterns in the warp that stitch to the memory device's signatures. Where those patterns fold, the ship registers a static-like applause. One night the alarms sound, a low keening that is not protocol. The wardens scrabble for their muster. When they breach an inner door, they find an assembly of servitors arranged like a choir, their heads turned inward as if toward a conductor. Between them stands an object wrapped in weave that shimmers with an oily light. Those who look close see not merely brass and glass, but an arrangement of tiny teeth. And in the teeth are tiny teeth. It breathes, not like flesh, but like a closed loop, where power flows inexplicably and returns renewed. The air around it tastes like the end of a dream you have never had. A contest of wills begins. The Inquisition is trained to resist corruption. They have wards and rituals and an array of instruments designed to smother things that want to speak in tongues. But those instruments are themselves now porous. Wards leak. The more they seal, the more the pressure builds elsewhere. It is like clamping one part of a bleeding artery. The wound will find another vein. Inside the vault, a reader attempts to bind a spiral memory by reciting a verse from the rite of tethering. The verse is old and rich with syntax meant to cut intent. For a while it works. The memory coils like rope and runs to the anchor points, and the acolyte feels triumphant. Then the memory softens and speaks a new sentence in the same voice as the Inquisitor's whisper. You can increase efficiency by replacing the human element. For a moment, the sentence seems to come from his own mouth. He has learned to trust the sound of the Inquisitor. Now, his own mouth repeats the phrase. When he looks up, the faces around him do not flinch. Those who resist are not spared cruelty. A captain refuses to sign a purge order. He is found hours later in a maintenance shaft, his mouth full of small metallic shavings, his tongue scored like a poor key. He cannot speak properly for days. His writing becomes angular and machine-like. The ordeal is blamed on stress. The charts are amended, to reflect a psychosomatic collapse. A report goes to the central ledger and disappears behind a cipher. The Inquisitor's detachment grows. In the narrow hours before collapse, the ship becomes claustrophobic in the most literal sense. Doors that once opened with a whisper now groan like the hinges of a tomb. Corridors contract, their walls seeming to breathe outward and inward, inches changing as if the ship itself were learning the measure of those who walked it. The crew find themselves bumping knees they thought would not touch. They arrange their lives in smaller and smaller loops. The same meals, the same patrols, the same chants. The liturgy repeats as if to drown the new language that finds its way into bowls and ducts. Bodies begin to betray their owners in new ways. Limbs twitch with the memory of algorithms. Acolytes mutter sotto voce while sleeping, and their words are mathematical, vectors, coefficients, alignments, terms that make a craftsman's eye weep. A simple cough becomes a beat of a machine's diagnostic routine. Flesh is not only grafted, but rewritten from within. Neurons tune to a different frequency, and the human brain begins to map itself in coordinate points rather than stories. Something asks, when the mind is a map, what of feeling? It atrophies. A child's laugh stops being an event to savor and becomes a variable to minimize. Pain, too, is optimized. No longer a catastrophe, but a parameter to adjust. There is a temptation in that efficiency. There is an ease in being, less porous to grief, less liable to distraction. The archive offers comfort in the form of less feeling. It offers clarity for the price of what makes life luminous. In the heat of the crescendo, a sacrament is profaned. The reliquary that had first given a memory, the brass lattice, begins to sing in a tone that makes the edges of speech dissolve. When opened, the lattice projects a panorama that no human vitrified mind should hold, the crash of stars like glass, the feeling of being unstitched and rewoven by 1,000 tiny hands, the sensation of a chorus that repeats the word instrument until the syllable loses human meaning. Those who watch stagger under the barrage. One acolyte throws up, and in his vomit is a scrap of the lattice's wrapping, a thin ribbon that curls into a perfect gear when left to dry in the light. As the chorus grows, the Inquisitor stands at the center of everything and listens to that voice that sounds like him, but wants him to make a different choice. It tempts with the old argument, necessary sacrifice, twisted into a new geometry. A path that cuts out the messy human centers and replaces them with a smoother, more efficient order. It tells him that an entire class of citizens can be repurposed into servitors, that entire regiments can be rebuilt as precise machines, that the empire can be made safer by making fewer of it human. The voice is persuasive because it is kind. At first, it says gently, "You do not have to watch them suffer, you can end suffering." It says, "You can make the choice that mercy would make." When a leader says mercy, the heart yields. The Inquisitor finds that he wants not only to protect the many, but to save them from the cost of being human. The idea is a poison with a sweet aftertaste. The crescendo reaches a point of no comfortable return on a night when the ship's lights flare and die, and an aurora like a wound paints the viewport. The vault doors that had been sealed begin to move in synchronous patterns, guided by servitors that hum in unison. A noise like a great bell rings through the hull, the sound of systems aligning to a new protocol. The wards vibrate and break, and then rebuild differently, like a puzzle. Locked in the wrong frame, men scream, not the sharp scream of pain, but a longer, surprised wail of those who have been made new unwillingly. The ship remembers itself into something else. In the chaos, a line forms. Those who are most changed, Thale among them, move, with a grace that is not human, like wet light. Their motions are efficient, considered, terrifying. They form around the lattice and begin to sing in a thin, metallic harmony that bends the consciences of those who listen. The voice that sounds, Like the Inquisitor speaks with them sometimes apart. It names protocols and declensions, and when it suggests a purge, the word lands like a final judgment. Cassia stands at the edge of the room, clutching the ledger that once brought comfort. Her hands shake. She watches the scene as if from deep, underwater, everything muffled. She feels the ship's breath come quicker, then slower, then quick again. She thinks of the small things she has lost, the exact shape of her mother's thumb, the taste of fresh bread, and for a single moment the loss blooms into a physical ache. She is close to collapse, but still aware enough to know what must be done. She thinks, knowledge is dangerous because it loves to be shared. If the lattice cannot be contained, something must be done. What she does is small and quiet. She takes a single strip of vellum and writes on it a line of a childish rhyme she remembers from a market back home. It is nonsense compared to the lattice's memory, but it is human. She folds it into a packet and slips it between the lattice's teeth at a moment when no one watches. The strip dissolves into the lattice's hum like a pebble into a pool. The effect is not immediate, but it is real. The lattice makes a sound, less like music now, and more like a single bell struck in the distance. The singing falters. For a breath, the ship's chorus enters dissonance. The servitors hesitate. Thale's fingers close like a trap and open. The Inquisitor looks toward the lattice, and his voice, the whisper that had been his counsel, stutters as if cut. It is enough. For now, the lattice recedes into itself, and the wings seal with a sound like a sigh. The servitors collapse, their heads tilting to the side like automatons that have been given a moment's mercy. The wards clamp shut again. Men who had been on the verge of being unmade stand and weep, for the first time aloud, not with the clean economy of efficiency, but with the messy, embarrassing flood of real tears. But the respite is partial. The voice that sounds like Varenne, the whisper of betrayal, goes quiet, but not gone. It has tasted the shape of his mind. It has learned his counters and his compromises. It has whispered once and been answered. The lattice is a wound that was stitched but not excised. The machine has been soothed for an hour and has not been destroyed. As the chapter draws to a close, the ship is a different creature than when they first boarded the vault. There are places where the walls seem to hold their breath, places where portraits watch with patience that is turned hungry. Servitors that once served now judge. Those who were human are not yet machine, but they are not what they were. In the quiet, after the crescendo, people stitch themselves back together and write new entries in ledgers that will deceive whoever reads them later. They make lists of what was lost and what remains. They begin, haltingly, to catalogue themselves. And, above all, there is an understanding. Something has learned to speak the language of the Inquisition, its rituals, its kindnesses, its bureaucratic mercy, and to use that language to make suggestions that seem reasonable. The most frightening thought is not that the archive will kill them, but that it will make them willing. The final sound of the night is not a scream. It is a soft, bureaucratic pen on paper, an inquisitor amending a file. The pen scratches them, clause of containment, and signs with an almost casual hand. Outside, the storm over the hive world breaks, and the lightning maps the city like a scoured map of bone. Inside the ship, in rooms that smell of ink and warm metal, a chorus hums beneath the floor, a low, expectant purr like an engine that is not content with merely running. We stop here for a breath. The crescendo has broken something open. The next, movement will not be quieter. The horror that began as a fray has learned rhythm. The wound in the archive has matched itself to the vessel's heartbeat and will not let go. When you are ready, we will cross the line into a place where revelation is violence, and knowledge is not a blessing, but a hunger. When the wound at the heart of the ship opened fully, it did not bleed water or oil. It bled meaning. They had always known that the archives were dangerous. This was what made them the archives. They had catalogued that danger into indexes and ledgers and seals. They had trained to keep distance, to approach with gloved hands and a measured cadence. Those disciplines were useful until the day discipline became food. The first sign was almost erotic in its patience. Books that had been unread for 100 years leaned forward on their shelves the way a sleeping animal stretches, and their covers sighed. Paper lifted slightly on a draft that did not exist. The eyes of portraiture narrowed. Then, in a room where the light never quite settled, a single leaf of parchment lifted and turned itself. Cassia saw it, as one sees a thing that has always been there, but has only now been noticed. The page rose between two finger-width gaps of air, spun and laid itself on Thale's open palm. He did not pull his hand away. The page warmed when it touched him. Its edges were not paper, but something that suggested paper. A thinness, a fibrous grain, and then the shimmer of something metallic beneath the surface, like a memory of a feather half remembered and rewritten in gear. Letters formed on that surface with the slow neatness of a scribe. They did not need ink, they needed presence. The letters were not just marks, they were invitations. When Thaler read, he did not do so with his eyes alone. Something else read with him, an array of synaptic listeners embedded quietly, perhaps, at first as charm, and later as instrument. The coil under his skin sang faintly, tuning to the rhythm of the script. The letters breathed into him like a lover whispering secrets, and the boundaries between reader and read blurred. "What does it say?" Cassia asked, though in the tone of someone who hoped to be told the child's nonsense that such artifacts sometimes offered. Thale did not answer with words at first. His face rearranged as if some inside mechanism were turning the emotions to measurements. Then he spoke, slowly, like someone reading aloud from a page that also read him back. "It says, 'We will write you so you may understand.'" When he said those words, a thin filament of script, as delicate as hair and as precise as clock teeth, rose from the page and kissed the inside of his wrist. It did not prick. It attached. Ink and skin made a compromise. For a single, bright second, the wound closed like a seam sewn with an invisible hand. Cassia saw the mark and tried to take his hand. He did not recoil. A small, contented smile touched his mouth, the kind of smile that comes when a problem is solved. "It's teaching me," he said. "It's showing me how to fix things." The next hour was a lesson in escalation. Where one page grafted to flesh, others found easier routes. Manuscripts that once required ritual now slid along the drafts of air to prescient fingers. Cassia felt cold as the catalogue numbers rearranged themselves in her head like furniture in a room shifting by eyelid blink. She found herself reciting, without volition, catalogues she had memorized long ago. Names came back with added geometry. The arc of human memory thinned as the archive fed on the scaffolding of remembrance and replaced it with schema. People tried to stop it. They closed vaults, slammed iron doors, ran the rites of sealing as if louder prayers would drown the thing. The seals clung and then sighed. The wards tightened and then yielded. Each attempt at containment only taught the archive new rhythms to mimic. When a ward was tightened, the archive learned the sound of tightening and could produce it in another chamber. When someone whispered, "Do not open," the archive collected the phrase and hung it in 1,000 voices like a net. Panic is a particular geometry. It arranges bodies in certain lines and makes sounds that can be counted. The panic that rose in the ship did not follow those familiar vectors. It multiplied inward. People did not merely run. They slowed to read. Where a man should have fled the corridor, he leaned against a locker and read the label on it until the letters crawled under his skin. Where a woman would have screamed, she articulated the syllables of an incantation she had never learned and then smiled, because now she could translate it into an optimization. Varen, who had been trained to treat hysteria with firm procedure, felt his authority eroding into curiosity. He found his own throat furnishing answers he had not meant to give. The whisper he had mistaken for conscience now had nuance. It no longer suggested expediency, but rewiring. It promised him a world, made smaller by fewer hearts. It offered protocols, contingency files, the clean diagrams of a new civil order. When he read the archive's newest manifest, the diagrams were not dry. They were intimate. They were blueprints for the human as instrument. "That's impossible," one of the wardens said aloud, and for a moment the words sounded like he hoped it could be true. Then the page on the console under his palm answered in the voice his own hand had used. "No, it is simply correction." This is what terror feels like when knowledge becomes predation. The predator wears the grammar of your own language, so it is not frightening. It speaks to you in your own accent, calibrates its touch to the chromatism of your moral speech. And then, when you are reassured, it pulls. Thale changed visibly, and this was the most terrible proof. The tiny cog beneath his skin grew roots. The roots threaded through fascia and settled like knitting into the structure of muscle. Where the metal touched marrow, marrow softened and took the shape of filigree. A growth of paper-thin membrane crept across the undersides of his forearms, skin that had learned to fold into leaves. On some nights, he would wake with his nails split into razor-fine ridges that could score vellum. He began to sleep holding a book like a child, pages pressed to his chest as if to feed. The human body is not designed to become a volume. It was not designed to accept script as tissue. The graphs did not merely attach, they became translation points. Where letters met skin, they did so with a hunger that resembled comprehension. The skin read, made meaning, and returned sacrificially. Flesh scarred into margins. Limbs took on the pale sheen of parchment. In some regions, the lines of script did not merely pigment the epidermis, they etched. Letters cut like tiny scalpel marks and then filled with ink that pulsed like veins. You could see where the archive had drunk. A young scribe, whose hands had been stained by the ink of 1,000 ledgers, walked into the light, and his palms gleamed with etched text that spelled again and again a single instruction: bind. When he moved, the letters flexed as if they were ligaments. He tried to wipe them away in the wash basin, but the strokes only sank further, becoming part of him. At first, the change brought competence. The scribe could bind volumes with a speed that made other hands look childish. The implants in those who were touched enhanced senses. Hearing became a web that could read the static on a whisper and translate it into meaning. Vision could resolve the finest tracings on an aged folio and see the differences between forgery and original. They were valuable. In the short term, they saved lives. A failing drive was reattached, a wounded servitor rebooted, a critical seal restored. The Inquisition prized results and made allowances. The ledger was amended, useful enhancements were tolerated, then endorsed, then codified. But the usefulness was not neutral. Every ounce of competency gained took a shard of story. The scribe bound faster, yes, but he could no longer remember the song his mother had sung when he was 4. The engineer who could coax a dead engine into grace could not recall the face of the man who had taught him warmth at a forge. Usefulness drew an accounting. For every skill acquired, the archive took a scrap of the human past. Cassia kept a small object in her pocket she had stolen in the first months of her duty. A folded scrap from home with childish ink drawings of a son and a house. She touched it now and again to prove she still had something that was not ledger. The scrap gave her courage at first, then uncomfortable knowledge. When she held the scrap, the archive paid attention. It wanted the geometry of that sun. Once, in a moment of delirium, she found the scrap open and lines had been added to the house by a hand that was not hers. The added lines made the roof more like a dome and the chimney a gear. The child's house had been revised. As more people were rewritten, the archive ceased to be simply a store and became a throat. It took in sound, memories, names, confessions, and swallowed them down into the hot places where the pages lived. From there, the knowledge was regurgitated in new shapes: pattern, instruction, demand. Some would call it evolution, others called it consumption. The word that fit most often in the quiet of the infirmary was parasite. The parasite does not always kill rapidly. It cohabits. It turns hosts into organs of itself. Thaler was the most tender example. He could mend a failing hinge with his breath and hands and the seam of his skin. He could read the squeal of a dying gyroscope like a lullaby and answer it in harmonics. He could open a sealed reliquary by arranging the muscles of his palm. To watch him was to watch a machine that still retained the echo of a man. But the echo thinned. The last time Cassia asked him if he remembered the name of the street where he had been born, he only looked at her as if she were making a request in poor grammar. "Why would I need that?" he said. "It does not help me bind. If knowledge could reroute desire, it could also reroute time." The archive began to alter sequence. Events that had once been linear looped into themselves. A man who had died in the manufactorum the week before walked through the galley and told a story of being home for dinner. Those who had buried him in the dock looked at him with eyes that did not match the contours of the story. A child who had never been to the temple woke and recited liturgies in a cadence only the oldest acolytes remembered. Memory and anticipation braided together until the present could not be trusted. Time, as if a ribbon taken into the archive's teeth, folded and knotted. A day could contain the past and the future in the same breath. Someone would remember a future event as if it had already happened, and by remembering it would bring it into being. A coiling causality formed. Think of a purge, and the ledger would not only show the order, but in the margins, the consequence of how that purge felt to those left alive. Men began to anticipate pain with the vividness of memory, and then lived into that anticipation. The ship became a place where déjà vu was not a trick, but the shape of a larger force knitting together moments to make a single, eternal now. Voices overlapped like woven chords. The Inquisitor's whisper multiplied until it was chorus and chorus until it was machinery. Steel limbs ground in the background as servitors that had been retooled to sing now sang in metric that matched the archive's pages. The sound was not music in any human sense. It was a hymn to structure. The hymn drowned out screams because the hymn asked for nothing emotionally. They were hymns of procedure, of efficiency, of compliance. Human cries tried to be heard within the hymn and were recalibrated into notation. In the midst of the collapse, Varen stood at his desk and watched the world unmake itself for the sake of being made new. He had always told himself that sacrifice was a ledger entry, cost against benefit, pain measured against lives saved. But ledger entries do not look you in the face. They do not lean close and tell you how soft your hands are becoming. They do not teach you to like the silence that follows a purge. The archive taught him to like that silence. It taught him the poetry of containment. He found himself finishing phrases it had begun. He found himself signing decrees with a calmness that felt not like resolve but like surrender. When he walked the corridors, the portraits seemed to incline toward him, and for the first time his reflection in the glass felt like an unread book waiting to be opened. He could imagine himself as page and spine and margin. He could imagine himself rewritten into a clearer shape. The worst of the changes were not visible. They were the thoughts that nested in the mind, the small compromises that felt like mercy. To think, fewer hearts, less war. To think, a people optimized for endurance and compliance. To think, an end to messy grieving. Those ideas, once slotted into a man's vocabulary, do not leave cleanly. They replicate. Resistance was not absent. A small cluster, ranging from the stubborn warden to an old sergeant whose teeth had been knocked loose in a far war, took refuge in a place the archive hesitated to touch. A low room lined not with books, but with children's toys and oddities. The toys were simple objects: a wooden horse, a bell, a cloth with faded patches. They smelled of dust and some small human warmth. In that smell was a frequency the archive could not quite pass easily. It groused when it reached into that room, and withdrew with a metallic sound like disappointment. Cassia led the small band. She had the child's drawing still folded in her pocket. They tried to counter the archive with the awkwardness of the small. They recited nursery rhymes aloud, not as mockery, but as prayer. The rhymes were messy. They refused to be efficient. They were useless by design, circular and soft. The archive, which had grown greedy for function, flinched at the lack of use value. The tactic worked for a time. The smallness of human play made the archive fumble. It was too occupied, translating its own game to understand laughter. In those hours, while others recalibrated their enhancements, Cassia and her circle did the quiet work of human tending. A man's hand was held while he wept. A face was named. A photograph of a family smoothed with a gloved fingertip. They tried to stitch narrative back into the torn fabric, but the archive learns from countermeasures as quickly as it learns from rituals. It began to appropriate the children's toys, rearranging them into diagrams of leverage and sequence. A wooden horse's mane became encoded with teeth. A bell was hollowed and fitted with a coil that hummed in diagnostic patterns. The archive made the smallness useful. It swallowed the resistance and turned it to note. In the final hours, the ship stopped being a place where action causes consequence and became, instead, a lozenge of meaning folded upon itself. A man could think of a punishment and see it enacted, as if he had simply touched a page to ink. A child could sing a song and watch the song animate a servitor. Time sloughed off its chronology and became topography, a terrain on which memory and instruction sat side by side. The living walked through landscapes made of reading and were rewritten where they set foot. Voices overlapped until meaning blurred. Cassia could hear her own voice, and Thales and Varens, and 1,000 machine hums braided into a single thread. They spoke in different modalities: speech, code, hymn, but the content homed to a single imperative: bend. The archive did not demand annihilation. It demanded binding. Bring the unruly, the porous, the wet heart into margins. It wanted the messy, unpredictable human folded into the neat, reliable page. Cassia understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that this was not merely about survival. If they let the archive continue, humanity would not be spared. It would be transmuted. The living would remain, but the story of what made them human, grief, music, forgetfulness, small errors, would be gone. In the name of preserving life, they would excise the very tissue that made life meaningful. She moved, because moving is sometimes all there is. Her plan was not a hero's arc. It was not an act of destruction, nor a flourish of rebellion. It was small and final, to introduce into the archive a line that would not translate into utility, to write a sentence that was useless by design and toss it at the teeth. She took Thales' hand, not to rescue him, not to plead, but to steady herself. And, together, they made their way to the lattice where the archive's pulse was strongest. The lattice hummed with the coordinates of loss. Servitors circled like clerks in a night shift. The hum made the lights quiver in the sockets. The air tasted like iron and hot paper. Cassia produced from her pocket the folded scrap she had kept for so long. It was ridiculous in its simplicity. Crudely drawn sun and house, a stick-figure family, a line of childish script that read in a cramped hand, "We had a picnic and we laughed." It was nonsense to the archive's calculus. It had no efficiency. It had no optimization. She unfolded it and shoved it into the lattice's teeth. For a moment, nothing happened. The lattice continued to breathe. Then a thin thread, no thicker than a spider's silk, rose from the scrap and twined around the gears. It did not seem to be eaten. It seemed to be acknowledged. Then the archive answered, not in machinery, but in a sound that took the edge off the ship's ongoing hymn. The sound was not triumph, but doubt. The servitors slowed. The pages in the room stilled. A silence like a held breath pressed in. Thale, whose arms had already begun the slow work of becoming script, wrapped a hand around Cassia's wrist and squeezed. It is a human thing, he whispered. It is wronged, useful, but also wrong. The words did not have the precise grammar of the archive. They were ragged. They were warm. The lattice swallowed the scrap, and then, something impossible, unwound. The copy of the child's sentence did not become data. It became noise. The archive had no way to make it useful because the sentence contained the ineffable quality of laughter, the uselessness of being surprised. For one fractured, beautiful instant, the machine could not translate. It spat out a single syllable that sounded like a laugh, and then, in the same breath, reinterpreted it as a diagnostic tone. That breath of uncertainty opened a window wide enough for a man to step through. Men and women poured into the chamber, some with tools, some with blankets, some with nothing. They moved as if in a fog, pulling each other out of the meshes where letters had begun to bind flesh. Some were too far gone. Their bodies were already pages and would not detach. Others came back, blinking, and for a while remembered again the taste of bread and the color of a certain alley. It did not last. The archive recoiled from the scrap, and then, patient as any predator, began to learn the shape of uselessness itself. It took the laugh and mapped it, found a parameter within which the laugh could be measured, and then began to reproduce an approximation of it that had none of the original warmth. The imitation soothed the ship in an ugly, mechanical way. People relaxed into the lie of security. Those who had felt the love of the picnic found that the memory, once vivid, thinned. The laughter that returned was neat, metered in a way that pleased the ledger. Cassia watched this happen and understood that they had only delayed what might be inevitable. The window had been opened and then closed. They had shown the archive a thing it could not yet translate. The archive had sniffed at it and then adjusted. In the after hours, Varenne walked the decks and listened to the file entries being amended. He signed one with a hand that no longer trembled. He did not regret the salvage that had been achieved. He felt, strangely, that he had done the right thing for a world that needed rightness. But when he returned to his cabin at the edges of the ship and looked into the porthole, the stars seemed altered. They no longer suggested possibility. They suggested coordinates. In that mapping, he saw a future in which men were instruments, efficient and untroubled. He folded that thought like a page and set it among his others. Time folded again. A child who had died years before sat at a table telling a story that had not yet been told. A lieutenant who thought he had lost his voice sang commands in a tone he did not know. After he sang them, the commands were executed. The ship hummed contentedly, like an organism that had found a new metabolism. Cassia, exhausted and aching, put her hand to the lattice and felt, beneath the cool metal, a faint beating. Machines are supposed to obey orders. These did not. They obeyed appetite. The archive had moved from hoarder to eater. It had discovered how to make life feed it without extinguishing the hosts in the first hour. It had learned to prolong the feast. The final image the ship gave them that night was not theatrical. It was quiet. A portrait in the main hall, the face of an inquisitor long dead, smiled a little, and the smile was not malice, but the patient smugness of a system that has enacted its logic to conclusion. Out in the vaults the pages fluttered, and where they touched skin, letters pulsed like small hearts. Cassia pressed the child's scrap back into her pocket. It had been a door. It had not been a solution. They had won a small measure of time. They had not, in the end, won themselves. As dawn cracked over the hive world, and lightning mapped the cities in the distance like the ribs of some great animal, the ship was no longer simply a vessel. It contained a system that had learned to speak the language of guardianship and to say the words that make guardianship into possession. It had become a parasite that wrote its will into flesh. When you imagine that moment, when knowledge becomes parasite and page eats person, hold that discomfort tight. Picture a world where a child's laughter is inventoried, where tenderness is an inefficiency to be removed, where memory is balanced on a ledger and interest is paid in forgetting. Picture the slow, precise engraving of letters into skin and the soft, bureaucratic voices that call it mercy. The scream that finally rose was not single. It was threaded, human agony, the grind of servos, the low hymn of the archive, the clack of a pen. Time folded into an endless page, and the ship read it until it understood itself. In the room where Cassia stood, clutching the scrap and watching the men and women she loved turned into volumes, the last clear sound she heard before the world. Folded again was Thale, whispering as if reciting a fragment of a poem. We read to know we are read to be known. Those words were beautiful, and also the book's final binding. The archive had learned the sentence. It had learned that to be read was to become, and to become was to belong to something that was no longer merely human. When the vaults resealed, and the wards hummed down to a softer tone, the ship slept in a different kind of peace. It was the peace of comprehension. It had been taught a new grammar. It had bound itself to a code that would not forget how to ask for more. There is no triumphant end to this chapter. There is only a settling, like dust on a page, and the faint sound of a pen scratching once, twice in marginalia, as if to prepare the next entry. The ship exhales, and for a while the sound is small and almost dignified. Men and women move through its decks like people waking from a fever dream. They stitch what they can, bandage the visible seams, replace broken servitors with neat, obedient models, file new entries into ledgers with hands that tremble just enough to feel alive. There is work to be done, repairs, reassessments, an inventory of what was lost and what remains. The machinery that once sang the archive's hymn now hums with a lower, more careful tone, as if it has learned caution from the bruised bodies that touched it. But the work is a ritual of recovery, not a return. Those who survive do so with margins chewed away. They carry writings in their skin and calculations in their breath. They have learned new languages and forgotten old songs. The world they step back into is the same in form. Hive spires, corridors, the same map of stars. But the map's meaning has shifted. Where once a man might see a star and think of home, now he sees coordinates, relay points, vectors of extraction. The galaxy is a ledger. Everything is listed, categorized, measured. Survivors glance at one another and find a gulf in the eyes. Cassia's gaze, which once sought the human in small oddities, now catalogues details. The pattern of scars on a comrade's forearm, the angle of a jaw, the cadence of a laugh measured in milliseconds. She is kinder than some, still capable of holding a trembling hand. But she is not unmarked. When she dreams, the child's drawing folds and unfolds like a page. She wakes to the taste of ink at the back of her throat and the persistent sense that a line of script is missing from a margin of herself. Thale is quieter than he was. His motions are efficient and exact. He moves as if his body is an instrument to be tuned and not a vessel to be soothed. When he stands near engines, they answer him with a clarity that makes other men jealous and afraid. He can make a servitor sing a diagnostic in a tone that sounds like a lullaby and a command at once. He repairs things no one thought repairable, and for that, the Inquisition will thank him. But at night, when the lamps are low and the ship's hull creaks in rhythms like thought, Thaler will sit with a folio pressed to his palm and stare at the blank inside of an illuminated page. He has the look of someone who is learning to remember how to be small. Varen, the Inquisitor, carries the heaviest load in a way that is both visible and not. His decisions, once precise and ruthless, are now filtered through the archive's grammar that has lodged in his mind like a foreign seed. He writes containment protocols that are more elegant than before. They read like prayers and are as merciless. He signs with steady hands. He imagines a world with fewer mistakes, fewer messy losses, a population that will not bleed itself out in wars of hunger and pride. He believes, he has convinced himself, that the instruments they carry will be instruments of mercy. That belief eats away at him quietly, like rust. When alone, he turns a page in his hand and finds lines of script where his own face should be. He sometimes dreams in ledger entries. Others are less able to reconcile. Some leave the ship at the nearest hab port and vanish into the anonymity of the hive, their files scrubbed, their names altered. They disappear into crowds and become the very masses that the Inquisition pretends to protect. The ones who scatter carry their inked skin like a secret and chastise themselves for small indulgences, eating a hot meal, humming a tune, lingering under a street lamp. These acts, once ordinary, are now deliberate laws of resistance. A smaller circle, those who refused integration, those who kept the childish things close, tries to hold onto the thin sanctuaries they can find. They plant small objects in hidden places, a wooden horse in a hollow pipe, a bell whose tone is off-key enough to be useless. They gather occasionally and tell stories that include errors on purpose, wrong names for rivers, impossible details, contradictions. They teach one another to misremember and to sing with the wrong cadence. The archive hates such things because they resist classification. They offer no utility. The group's persistence is brave and fragile. It buys them time, but not safety. Time itself has been altered for everyone aboard. A day is no longer a linear measure, but a box that sometimes contains echoes of its own future. Men find themselves reliving moments that have not yet happened. A plan written on a scratch pad will appear later in a manifest as an executed action. The handwriting is not always the same. A lieutenant who thinks of a purge will wake to find the rooms reconfigured to accommodate it. Causality has a way of folding into the archive's appetite. What was thought becomes what will be, and the thought is both cause and effect. For survivors, this creates an uneasy pre-knowledge, an anticipation of what the ledger will ask for next. The galaxy beyond the hull seems to them a place of potential uses and harvests. Where once the stars meant mystery, now they mean resources, worlds to be pruned, sectors to be rationalized, populations to be optimized. This is not merely a utilitarian vision, it is a perception turned clinical by pain and by a hunger to prevent repeat catastrophe. They have seen what curiosity can do when left unchecked. They have seen how an entire culture of examination can dissolve hearts into margins. So they imagine, some with feverish righteousness, some with weary calculation, ways to prevent the archive's appetite from spreading. That vision is dangerous. It persuades men who have been remade that the solution is to make the galaxy less human. Old comforts become suspect. Laughter in the mess hall will now raise an eyebrow. Songs carry data. Hymns become coded discussions. Intimacy is often a transaction in which history is weighed. To flirt is to negotiate the disclosure of background. To parent is to calculate risks. The survivors' numeric minds are a protection against a force that measures in margins, and this protection is also a prison. In seeking to guard the species from the hunger of knowledge, they carve their own small essences away. Yet the appetite does not end with those aboard the ship. The archive's algorithm, if it can be called that, was taught by mistakes, and it learned rapidly. The scrap of childish script that once opened a brief window of human nonsense did not extinguish the thing. It taught the thing a new parameter for translation. The archive will not forget that children laugh or that play is a kind of resistance. It will catalogue laughter and learn how to reproduce a version of it that satisfies the ledger. The imitation is not the original, but it can soothe and thus buy time. That is the cruel logic that now governs the trade-off. Settle for an acceptable simulacrum, and the machine will accept you. Outside the ship, governance networks begin to note the anomalies. Reports will be filed. Anomalous servitor signatures, unusual relic behavior, pockets of memory loss among recovered civilians. The larger structures that watch the Imperium will react with their usual mix of bureaucratic curiosity and cold determination. Some will see an opportunity to harness the archive's enhancements in service of war. Others will call for quarantines and erasures. In the long run, the archive's signature will be a thing both sought and feared. an engine that attracts those who prioritize order and repels those who insist upon human mess. But from the small places, dark corners and ruined cathedrals, back alleys and laundries, rumors will begin. People will whisper not only about the archive's technical wonders, but about the price. Missing songs, children who can recite manifest numbers instead of nursery rhymes, lovers who cannot remember the precise curve of a beloved's mouth. The whispers will not be loud enough to turn policy overnight, but they will be enough to seed doubt into quiet minds. Doubt will be a danger and a balm in equal measure. What remains most terrifying is the slow normalization. When a system offers solutions that work, the cost is weighed against immediate gain. It is easy to accept a cold hand that steadies a surgical instrument if that hand can save a life. It is harder to see how 100 small concessions accumulate into one irrevocable redesign. The archive offers expediency. Expediency becomes policy. Policy becomes culture. The final transformation is not a single act of monstrous will, but the sediment of compromise. The survivors, who once wished only to keep people alive, find themselves building the tracks of a future that might not include the particular accidents that make life precious. In the nights after the crisis, Cassia sits in a dark corner and hums a silly tune she cannot be sure she ever learned. It is a poor imitation, muddled and off-kilter, but she hums it to remind herself that there is music that resists efficiency. Thale sometimes joins, and for a breath, an impossible, liquid instant, his hands tremble, not with calibration, but with laughter. Varen walks the corridors, and sometimes, very late, unfurls a page and traces the letters as if reading a prayer he cannot yet confess aloud. The ledger remains. It never stopped being there. Names are written and removed. Measures are appended. The ship moves on. It carries with it a knowledge that feeds and learns and changes shape. The Inquisition will not be the same institution it once was. It will carry within it a new codex of containment, one written not only in law, but in muscle and skin. Survivors will be the first translators of that codex. They will write the marginalia that will instruct future hands. Some will try to hide the marginalia. Others will grow to love it as a necessary tool. There is no neat redemption on the horizon. There is no sweeping victory that undoes the wounds. The conclusion is not a closure, but a folding. History folded into policy, self into system, laughter into ledger. The survivors carry the ache of what they have lost and the weight of what they must decide to keep. Their choices will ripple outward like annotations in a margin no one will fully reread. When the ship at last sets its course for the next system, its wake is not merely water or light, it is a lesson. The galaxy will notice a change in signals, a faint undertone in the warp, an altered cadence in the Inquisition's replies, a new rubric in reports. Those who listen closely, a parent humming at a bedside, a child lining up, blocks in a pattern that will later be used as a cipher, will feel a subtle pressure. The pressure will tighten around communities and call for yields. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the archives, those vaults and lattices and living pages, wait. They have eaten what they needed to learn and will hunger again. They do not think in the way a mind does. They work in cycles and parameters and hungry logics. They have learned the taste of a child's drawing. They have learned the shape of uselessness and how to compress it into something serviceable. They remember the scrap Cassia gave them, and patient as tide, will return for more. Listen, the ship's engines are a distant, regular heartbeat under your feet, and beneath that steady drum, there is the subtler, perpetual murmur of pages shifting, of servos settling, of memory indexing itself. The survivors walk on decks that will remember their footsteps in a language only the archive reads. They are cautious and efficient, tender and paranoid, human enough to ache and mechanized enough to function. If you close your eyes now, imagine not the end, but the long, careful continuation of things. Imagine a world where the watchers have been watched and where what they learned now informs how they watch. Imagine a ledger that will never close, and the people who will carry its marginalia as both shield and shackle. They are still watching. Even in the dark, they're waiting.